Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Phillips, and we're here with our regular Zoom panel of Tracy Calogheros, Todd Corrigall, and Mackenzie Kerr. And we have a special guest today, Chuck Nisbett, mainly because Mackenzie brought up an issue last week, just as it was breaking, the whole issue surrounding the killing of George Floyd down in Minneapolis, and everything that's transpired since then. We've asked Chuck to join us today to help give his experience as a Black man in Prince George, and what this means to you, and what were your thoughts when you saw all this transpire over the last week?
It's been an interesting week. There's been a lot to take in. I mean, things have moved pretty quickly down in the States. I think initially, I just thought it was going to blow over, and then it quickly escalated and became a valid talking point amongst everybody, and a very important part of the political spectrum down in the States as well. So over the last week, we've seen it become much more politicized and grow throughout the world, and it's becoming a part of the American story, a part of the way that the world is judging America right now on how this is dealt with. And when we were off the air, I was talking about discussing some of the posts that my kids have made and my family. And it's being watched very, very closely by Black people in Canada, England, which is where both my kids and family are from, and throughout the world. It's a very important issue.
You talked about your kids. It must be particularly troubling for you to see your kids have to witness this as well.
Well, that's it. I mean, my son is 30 and, well, 29, and I talked to him last night, and he's attending a protest in Vancouver today, and a discussion, and they're very, very involved in how this is going, and he's quite concerned with what is being quoted as racism and what is really more a systemic prolonging of the American way of dealing with any change, you know, and it's becoming a very, very strong political animal, which could change the way that things happen this coming fall in the States. You know, yeah. I could definitely see it having a very strong impact on the way the election goes.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy with Trump, you know, clearing the way to go stand in front of a church, and the armed you know, soldiers in the street down there. It's absolutely nuts. We'll just go to Mackenzie. You're the one that brought this up last week, this issue anyways, and it was just as it was breaking, and you pointed out that this was going to be a big issue. I just wonder what your thoughts a week later and what you've seen.
Sure. So part of me is happy that, you know, cell phones are a thing, because this has happened so many times, but it wasn't filmed. And I'm, you know, it was absolutely terrible. I couldn't even watch the full video. And I think that it's great that we're finally having this conversation. But it's it's taken a long time to get here. And I think that there is still a lot of racism in our communities, and a lot of people are saying, oh, that's happening in the States, it's not happening in Canada. But I have witnessed, you know, a lot of friends and people that I know experiencing this kind of thing in any minority group. And I think it's very important that we focus on anti-Black racism right now. I see a lot of politicians not even mentioning you know, anti-Black racism in Canada. They just start tweeting about Indigenous racism. And that is something that I've started to notice. And I think that we need to be talking about these, you know, just because there was a good analogy of diseases, and they were saying, even though we're saying cancer is really important right now, we need to focus on this, it doesn't mean that Alzheimer's is any less important. It's just what we're focusing on at the moment. There's a good house burning analogy. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to understand what we're talking about. And people are still saying, well, all lives matter. And those people are kind of the people that are really frustrating me right now, because, you know, this isn't, saying all lives matter is not fixing any problem. We need to focus on the racism that is happening in our communities and speak up when we see injustices happening. And that's how I was raised. And I will be using every platform, every opportunity, every chance I get to be talking about this issue and attending the protest. I can give some information on the event stuff at the end of this if we want. Encourage people to come and peacefully protest with us. And I think that it needs to be talked about more, and I'm glad it's happening. And I think that this is just going to keep escalating until things change.
Tracy, your thoughts on what's happened over the last few days, and perhaps maybe some of the Canadian response to it. We're kind of Prime Minister Trudeau said there is racism in Canada. Obviously there is. But is it the same as what's happening in the States here? And are we better positioned to deal with this, or are we ahead, or what are we doing here?
Well, asking the middle-aged white lady to expound on her racist experiences is a little bit tough. I have never been subject to racism. I have all of that privilege that comes with being a white Canadian. My exposure primarily to it, I suppose, has been through my work with the Klate-Litene, and they taught me a lot around listening. And listening is a term that I'm seeing a lot in the social media posts in the last few days about this entire issue. And people are being asked to really listen, and not just listen and wait for their chance to speak or to diffuse or to deflect. It's true listening. And it took me a long time. Some of you may have noticed I like to yap. And it took me a long time to learn from the elders that I needed to shut my mouth and open my ears and listen. And I think that's a lesson the entire world could stand to learn right now. You know, I was in Toronto in 1992 during the riots for Rodney King. And when I saw what was starting to happen in media in the last week, it was like a flashback to 1992. And it's disheartening to think that we could be having exactly the same conversations this much time later. To Mackenzie's point, yes, there's cell phones and there's more of it now. So people are seeing that this thing that happens once in a while, it's happening all the time. And I guess, COVID exacerbated the inequities in society. And so this explosion was pretty predictable. And I don't know what the solutions are. I don't know how to help other than to offer my support and to listen and to create a facility like we have here at Exploration Place that is a safe place for difficult discussions, a community forum for everyone. And I don't know what to do other than to step back and say, I'm listening.
Todd, what's your take on this? And from the chamber, I don't know if what the chamber can do, or, what do you do? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's something that the chamber does specifically from a business perspective. I think, we can all have conversations about how we interact with one another. And, not unlike Tracy, I kind of went back to that Rodney King piece as well. And, I grew up in that tapestry of Toronto with friends from all races, religions. It was never a discussion or an issue. And so you watch the militarization down in the States, and it's challenging. And a friend and I were talking the other evening, and she said, what do you think about this? And it just makes me sad. I mean, how have we as a community functioned so well to move so forward in so many different areas, and yet not even regress, not just move forward in this one area where, Chuck's not different from I am, Mackenzie's not different from Chuck, and we're all the same person when it comes down to it. But I've never experienced racism. I've been racist adjacent, where I've had to see that. So I think, when you ask what the chamber can do, I don't think there's something we do specifically. I think it's something as a community we all do together, and that's recognize that we're all people, we're all human, we're all individuals, and we all have a right to be here, just like anybody else. And we need to work collaboratively at what that looks like. And this discussion is really, really challenging because we just haven't moved it enough or at all over a very, very long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add a quick something, Bill?
Yeah, by all means, jump in.
Okay, thanks. So PG Perg is a not-for-profit at the university, and they put on their Instagram yesterday that they're trying to support and promote Black-owned companies in Prince George, people that are Black that own companies. So if you know of any, and if you could let them know, they're compiling a list. And that's something that I think we can do, is be supporting Black, Indigenous, and people of color that own businesses in our town, and be supporting those artists and business owners and things like that. I think that's something that we could really do. So if you do know of any, I dropped a couple that I know on their page, then they're trying to compile a list. And then that is something that we can actively do, is support those businesses and those artists.
Okay, Chuck, a couple of things. Mackenzie talked previously about Black Lives Matter, and you see, if you're on social media at all, there's a lot of people saying, well, it should be all lives matter. From your perspective, what's the difference between that? A lot of people will stress that if you're saying, oh, all lives matter, you're just not getting it. What are your thoughts?
I don't necessarily go down that route. I do see that you should be seeing the Black Lives Matter point, but I see the all lives matter as well. I grew up in England. I was born in England. And in the 60s in England, it was a very, very racist time. Right? It was very different from Canada when I arrived here in 1975. And when I did get to Canada, I looked around and I saw no racism here at all. In fact, I see more racism now in the last 15 years than I did back in the 70s in Canada.
Wow. And
it's not so much that there's more racism, but there is more access to it, right? There is more with social media and phones, there is more showing. And that, I think, it has been a really big thing about making everybody understand and see what racism is in the States and here and all over, is that, as Ms. Mackenzie said, the people are showing it more. It's more out there. And I really don't feel that you need to put lines in the sand, black, white, red, whatever. I really feel that you just need to say people matter. I agree. Black Lives Matter is a way of pulling people together, but don't let it divide the lines too. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's injustice everywhere. And if you just concentrate on Blacks, what else is getting by the sidelines, right? It's got to be all encompassing. The Indigenous people in town have always made me feel very, very welcomed into their community. Whenever I visited, working as a photojournalist or as a private citizen, I've never had a problem relating to the Indigenous people. And I feel that they see everybody in a more whole way than the the very definite splits among the people. You know, I just find that we don't need to define so much. You know, I think we need to work at making sure that everybody is represented and everybody is taken forward. And, you know, the black, the white, the red, it'll all take care of itself if everyone is represented. You know, I read a story today about a young lady who is the valedictorian of the U of T medical school. She's the only black in the class, and she became the valedictorian. And the thing that really got me is, well, 30 years ago, we would have been going, she's a woman and she made it as the valedictorian in the class, right? Well, you know what? That's changed. This can change too. We can all move it all forwards, right? You know, there is no need for it to be broken up so much. Everything can change, and it's slowly moving forward. It's slow, but it's happening.
Right on. Tracy, you talked a little bit about your relationship with the Clayton Tenay. What do you think? And Chuck talked about that. What do you think they can bring to this conversation, or the ways they deal with things? You've obviously seen some of that as well.
I've learned a lot at the foot of the elders. I really have. And I think the best person to ask that question would be one of the Clayton Tenay elders. My sense from them has always been that they're open and welcoming and more than happy to talk about not just their own lived experience, but their traditional history as well as their future. And they have always, the people that I've worked with within the Clayton have always looked to the future. It isn't about being mired in the past. And that's my sense of what Chuck's comments are there as well. You know, Trump didn't invent racism. He just made it acceptable on a public front. And then the internet spread it around the world so fast. And the 21 seconds that Trudeau paused yesterday said more than anything I could say right now.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Todd, speaking of the pause, what's your takeaway from the 21-second pause from Prime Minister Trudeau? Was he being dramatic, or was he seriously struggling for something to say, something nice to say, I guess?
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask him what the process was behind that. I would agree with Tracy that it was probably the most impactful thing you can do. And I think if you look at the world news following that non-statement statement, it was pretty big in that sense. And I have to agree, you know, the pervasiveness on social media of accepting racism is what has kind of, to Chuck's point, the groundswell. You know, we're more racist, or there's more evidence of racism now than there was in the 70s is a really complicated thing when you think back to how racist the 70s could have been and were in some instances. You know, that aspect of Trump making it acceptable to not just be a racist, but to be an outward racist right now, and to make those inflammatory comments and then challenge somebody adjacent to you to be even more racist than you are, and drive a car through a crowd of people. And, you know, the spiraling of this is the complicated matter behind it. From a political standpoint, you know, I think there's a lot to be said for a leader standing up and making a very bold statement. And while a lot of people will go out and say, boy, you know, the prime minister blew an opportunity to come out and denounce Trump and say that this is all wrong and we need to be focused on these issues. Again, sometimes not saying something is much more impactful than saying something that just incites the next level. And we've seen Trump and other strongman leaders like him, who are not strong at all, take statements of another and use those as jumping off points for their next piece. And so I don't disagree with the tactic of actually taking that time to reflect on what your response is going to be.
Just switching a bit, Mackenzie, we'll go to you, who is the considerably younger than the rest of us here. But a lot of this has happened through social media. Do you feel that maybe part of this groundswell of support and protesting anti-Black racism in the States and here, and do you think that this is somewhat of a more youthful movement, or can we be more heartened perhaps that this is a youthful movement rather than the old, my generation, the boomers, just fading off? This is some of our problems.
So I wanted to quickly just respond to what Todd was saying before I respond about social media. I saw a quote, and it was a really great quote, and I'm not saying that this specifically to the Trudeau situation, but I think cases right now, the quote was, "It's not good enough to be silently non-racist. We have to be loudly anti-racist." Mm-hmm. And right now, not specifically, I can't say what I would have done in Trudeau's position. I probably would have been out of words as well, in shock and disbelief. But I think right now, those with white privilege need to be speaking up about this and not just saying, this isn't my place to say anything, I'm just going to sit back. Listening is great, but calling out our, the people in our lives that have little passive aggressive comments that are racist, that's the work that we need to be doing. Because the people that are protesting on the street, the Black people in our lives, they're not at our kitchen table. They're not in the the locker room when things like this get said. So it's our job to be the ones loudly being anti-racist to stop this in their tracks, because that's what's making it continue in our culture, is we don't want to be uncomfortable, so we don't want to say anything. So that's kind of the tactic I'm taking and promoting, because I think that that's the only way that we're going to change this. As to social media, I think I see a lot of that right now. I see a lot of people being loudly anti-racist, and that's exactly what we need in this time. Obviously, I am a white privileged young woman. I don't have, I don't have a lot of the instances that people of color do, obviously. So I think that we need to be asking them first and foremost, and those with a platform and a privilege need to be lending them to people of color right now to be sharing their message. And I'm really happy that you invited Chuck, because, we're a pretty, white group here in this political panel. So it's great. And I think that we need to be doing more of that. So social media is a huge tool right now. And a lot of the problems that I'm seeing generationally is one generation is getting news from CNN, Fox News, Global, CTV, and it's very, very filtered. And my generation is getting news straight from Twitter, straight from TikTok, videos on the ground, and directly from the sources. And we're seeing different news. People that I'm around that are in boomer generations are seeing fires started, cars, being on fire, looting happening, but we're realizing who's actually doing that, and it's not the Black protesters that are peacefully protesting. So that is the message that is not getting across, is we're kind of batting heads and we can't get to where we need to be to. We need to agree we want to end racism and work towards doing that successfully, but we can't even agree on the problem, because one person is seeing some news and I'm seeing other news, and we're butting heads over what's actually happening. So social media can be a great tool, a great tool for, getting the real news. But, we're also seeing a lot of corruption come from, social media as well. And on TikTok, the George Floyd hashtag was blocked by TikTok. So you would try and post a video and tag that to spread the movement and the message, and TikTok blocked it. So a lot of the problem is, with these apps like TikTok, it's a Chinese company, and so we have to be very careful how we're communicating online as well, what's out there, and we're being restricted. And there was recently a blackout on TikTok to promote Black creators and artists, because they were being shadow banned on the app. So this is happening right in front of our eyes, and my generation is seeing it, because one video goes viral and says, I'm shadow banned, look at this, the hashtag's all blocked. And then people are so aware of it and outraged that this is happening. All of a sudden now, all these accounts are taking off because people are so upset that it's happening. So it can be a great tool, social media, but we need to make sure everyone's on the same page. So
Chuck, you spent years as a photojournalist. What's your take on social media, and Mackenzie's right. You can see videos of stuff as it's happening, just like this is. Like you see it happening. The technology is amazing, but it's on the other hand, you could be seeing stuff out of context. What's your view?
That's entirely my problem with social media. As a photojournalist for 30 years, I mean, you have trained journalists acting as the gatekeeper of the news, right? I mean, we were out there seeing what was happening and bringing it without filter as much as possible to the masses, right? Showing them the news in a clean format without bias. Whereas in social media, you don't know who's posting what or how things are getting to you, how things are edited, how things are biased. It can very much change the message, how a presentation is done. Putting the information out with the old 5 W's is very straightforward, but you can change how you present those 5 W's so many ways. And I think the problem with our lack of journalists now, our dwindling number of journalists and newspapers, is that we're getting raw feed that is not being presented in a way that people can quickly and honestly accept. And they're having a hard time with a lot of the strange things that are coming in, seeing bits and pieces of a video of Trump marching through the crowd, and then a bunch of pictures of rioting in Minneapolis, and suddenly people are saying, those black people are doing crazy things, they're rioting, and they're upsetting the president. And then you see a piece where Trump comes through the crowd, and you see beforehand the crowd peacefully standing there with their hands up saying we're not doing anything, or sitting on the ground with their hands up saying we're not doing anything, and we're just peacefully protesting. And it's a whole different picture. It's all in how it's presented. And something I've really got to mention is the presentation of the police throughout this. Okay, it was a police officer that did this, but that's not police. That's a man. Okay. I have worked for 30 years very, very closely with police forces all over Canada. And there are people who have dedicated their lives to helping their communities. Okay, 95, 99% of those people are amazing people. And, they're your neighbors and friends. And they would quite happily take a knee or join in with the protests, but they can't. They're sworn to do as they're told. So they have to listen to the command that comes down to them. And it's just now that you're starting to see where the higher officers in the chain of command are starting to say, okay, it's okay if we say we're with you. That you're starting to see the police say, no, we won't do this stuff. So I think that's very, very important that people understand that the police are out there too, feeling the same way as you, but they're just trying to follow the rules that are given to them without, doing too much damage or doing any damage at all, actually. They're trying to follow and make you just sit back and relax. So just remember that during the protests that we're having here and everywhere, 99% of the people around you are on your side. It's just that 1%.
Tracy, do you think that maybe part of this? I know we've seen it here in the past, and I think of the Wet'suwet'en blockades. Part of the problem here with the police is that they are now more militarized.
Boy, well, I liked Chuck's quote that that's not police, that's a man. I don't like the look of the militarizing of the police forces, and it really does stem, I think, from what's happening in the US. They've been militarizing the look of their police forces down there for years, and then you start to see it happening here in Canada. And I think that how things look matters, and it does a sense of us and them. As I said earlier, racism's not new. And the kinds of challenges and the social inequities that are shining a light on this at the moment are not new. You hear me talk a lot about scientific literacy and how important that is. I don't talk as much about cultural literacy of late, but I think that in a moment like this, where we are looking at the Black Lives Matter movement and we're in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, literacy in general, whether it's scientific or cultural, is so vital to being able to move forward collectively. I agree with Chuck. I don't think the police are out to get us, whether you're a white woman or a Black man in Canada. But there are people who are out to get us, whether you're a white woman or a Black man. And I think it's important to make the distinction that the man who murdered George is a murderer. He doesn't get to claim he's a police officer who's acting under the benefit of his shield. He's clearly a murderer. And the people that helped him perform that murder are also murderers. And if we're not going to deal with people in the same way, we run into these problems. So the fact that they're wearing a badge shouldn't absolve them from the consequences of their crime, because it is a crime and they can't be police officers and commit crimes and allow that to stand. And that's what the outrage is saying to me in any case.
Mm-hmm. Todd, do you switching a bit, seeing a lot of the protests down in the States and certainly coming up here, do you fear that perhaps some of the bad elements of those could spill over into Canada? We're a little more genteel, I guess, when it comes to these things.
Well, I'd love to think that we're a more civil society, but I think, Chuck raises the great point that, there's always 1%. There's always somebody who's in it for the wrong reasons, who says, oh, great, here's this large gathering where I can go and grab a TV from that store because no one's going to be paying attention to me, the individual. They're going to be paying attention to the mass. And that's frustrating for sure. And we certainly hope that that whatever rallies and organizing is done here in Prince George and in Canada as a whole is done fundamentally sound and with the message that this is for the inequities against the Black community, and that we're all in it together and we're looking for these solutions. Having said that, I was in Toronto for the Rodney King riots, and there was things that occurred during that that you certainly don't want to see. And so I don't know how you stop that 1%, but I think the larger message here is that there's a fundamental community challenge before us right now, and assembling to have a discussion and stand together about that is more important than anything else. And we need to put the rest of it aside right now. So my hope is right now, specifically to Prince George, that doesn't happen here, because I think there's a really great conversation that's coming out of a terrible tragedy, and it's long overdue, and hopefully it doesn't sit idle after this point for another 15, 20, or 25 years.
Yeah, that's one of the other points, is that, we've mentioned Rodney King here a few times. I remember that quite plain as day, and watching it on, that was probably one of that and OJ was one of the first things that these things happened right on TV live as they were happening, right? And we were just astounded. And now here we are, almost 30 years later, and we're doing the same thing. Yeah, it's I lost my train of thought. Sorry, I had a question for you, Mackenzie, but I see you were ready to go anyway. So
I'm always ready to go. I wanted to, is our time ending soon?
pretty quick. I was going to
Okay.
give you one, and
So
then
I wanted
let Chuck finish us off. So
yeah, I wanted to just mention the protest. Talking so much about riots, and I wanted to set the distinction because the people that are peacefully protesting in the States, again, are not the ones looting the stores. It's white people dressed up, stealing and breaking the windows to make this protest look bad. They're doing it on purpose. So we need to make sure that no one has in their head that these are the same groups of people. They're trying to distinguish themselves down south as far as possible from the people doing the destruction. This is not the same group of people. So in Prince George, it's on Friday at 2 p.m. in front of City Hall. And we're telling everyone, wear your masks, keep your social distancing. We're making sure that everyone follows those rules. I mean, we're doing the best we can. I'm not an organizer. The climate strikers have organized the Facebook event page. They're young youth. So, you know, I'm in contact with them a little bit to help out, and I've been in contact with the mayor, and I have the superintendent's number, and I will be trying to make sure that, you know, everything stays as calm as possible, and that these Indigenous youth don't have to be dealing with the superintendent when they're trying to organize the event. So I kind of have made that connection with the mayor to make sure that things are going well. And so far we're staying at City Hall, but if things change and we want to do a march, apparently the superintendent is on board to help us block traffic. So yeah, this will be a peaceful protest, much like every other peaceful protest all across, you know, North America and the world right now, except there's some people ruining it that aren't even part of the movement. And in Vancouver, there's 25,000 people in Vancouver 2 days ago, and it was peaceful. There was no problem at all. So our, you know, 400 to 600 people that are going to show up in Prince George so far on this Facebook page won't be a problem at all. And we're all going to stay as safe as possible and bring attention to this issue. So yeah, but thanks for giving us this opportunity, Bill.
thank you. Well, we'll give the last word to Chuck. Any last words on this issue? What can you say? What would you like to say to people?
I've got a couple of things I'd like to say. I'd like to say to the people of Prince George, remember that it's a great community. And Prince George has moved forward steadily, accepting everybody in. We've had people come from the Middle East, from Africa, from Europe, everywhere. In the last few years, especially since the university has opened, there's been a huge influx of people from outside our country to Prince George. And there hasn't been any problems. You know, Prince George is a community that accepts people. We're very open. And I'd like to see that continue. I'd like people not to go down the divisive race routes and stay as a community that is joined together, you know, and just move forward. Keep looking at this, watch what's happening, take it as what it is, see the strange feeds that you get sometimes on the different news and understand it for what it is. Look at the mainstream news as well and compare the two and see where you stand and just keep yourself. I mean, Prince George has been doing a beautiful job, and I'd just like to see it continue.
Right on. Well said. Well said.
Thank
and
you.
On that, I want to thank everybody for participating, and we'll see you again next time. And thanks, Chuck, for sitting in, being our guest this week.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Okay.